Sheldon Mitchell, 26 here. I always believed family meant unconditional support, a place where everyone was valued equally. Growing up with my sister Amber, 4 years younger, we shared everything despite our parents' subtle favoritism toward her. Last summer, while finishing college, I discovered just how unequal things were when Mom announced a lavish family vacation. Well, not exactly family. Before continuing my story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if family drama hits close to home. Trust me, what happens next changed everything. I grew up in a modest 2-story home in suburban Denver, Colorado. Our neighborhood was the kind where kids played in sprinklers during summer and built snowmen in winter. My parents, Thomas and Diana Mitchell, created a comfortable middle-class existence for us. Dad worked as an engineering manager at a construction firm, while Mom built a successful career as a pharmaceutical sales representative. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family of 4. But inside those walls, I always sensed something was off. The favoritism toward Amber was subtle at first. When I brought home straight, as my parents would offer a quick good job before moving on to dinner conversation. But when Amber brought home B's and C's, they'd celebrate with ice cream outings and excessive praise about how hard she tried. I told myself this made sense. Maybe she needed more encouragement than I did. As we grew older, the pattern became more obvious. When I was 16, my debate team won nationals in Washington, D.C. I prepared for months, working on arguments late into the night after finishing my regular homework. When we brought home the trophy, my parents attended the school ceremony but left early because Mom had a sales meeting. They gave me a card with $50 inside. 3 months later, Amber performed in a regional dance competition. Her team placed 12th out of 15 groups. My parents not only attended the full 6-hour event, but threw her a surprise party afterward with extended family and friends. They framed her participation certificate and hung it prominently in our living room. My national championship trophy gathered dust in my bedroom closet. "Your sister needs more encouragement," Dad explained when I carefully brought up the discrepancy. "Success comes naturally to you, Sheldon." I nodded and buried my feelings. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being petty. The pattern continued through high school. When college acceptance letters arrived, I got into Cornell with a substantial academic scholarship. My parents congratulated me over dinner, then immediately pivoted the conversation to Amber's upcoming dance recital. 2 years later, when Amber got accepted to Colorado State University with no scholarship, my parents threw a massive backyard celebration. They invited the entire extended family, had custom decorations made, and gifted her a new laptop for school. I watched from the sidelines, nursing a growing resentment that I continued to suppress. "Why did Amber get such a big celebration when I barely got a dinner?" I asked Mom privately after the party. She patted my shoulder dismissively. "You will understand when you are older, Sheldon. Amber needs more support to succeed in life." That phrase became her standard response any time I questioned the imbalance. "You will understand when you are older." As if some magical revelation would eventually justify the inequality. During college, I worked 20 hours weekly at the campus bookstore and took summer internships to cover my living expenses. My scholarship covered tuition, but everything else came from my own pocket. Meanwhile, Amber received full financial support for everything from rent to grocery money to spring break trips. "Amber is not as independent as you," Dad explained during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "She needs help figuring out adulthood." Despite the favoritism, Amber and I maintained a close relationship. She never asked for the special treatment, and often seemed embarrassed by it. During her sophomore year, she started calling me weekly, seeking advice about classes and relationships rather than asking our parents. Mom and Dad are so intense about everything she confided during one call. They act like every decision I make is life or death. It is suffocating. I sympathized with her position. Being the favorite child came with its own pressures and expectations. She was trapped in a different way than I was, yet I still loved my sister even as my relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained. By my final year of college, I had developed a pattern of brief monthly calls, home sharing minimal information about my life. I kept conversations surface level, avoiding any topics that might reveal my growing independence or success. It was easier than facing the inevitable way my accomplishments would be downplayed while Amber's would be elevated to extraordinary heights. I graduated with honors, landed a solid entry-level position at a technology firm, and moved into my first apartment. My parents attended my graduation, but left immediately afterwards, citing the long drive back to Denver. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of the fact that I had worked myself through college while maintaining a 3.9 gigapascals. Just a card with $100 and another pat on the back. "We are so proud of you," Mom said mechanically before they departed. "You have always been our rock." I nodded and waved them off, telling myself family relationships were complicated, that all families had their issues, that things would improve with time and distance. I was wrong. It was May of last year when everything finally crystallized for me. I had come home for the weekend to celebrate Amber's upcoming graduation from Colorado State. Mom insisted on preparing a special family dinner, something that had become increasingly rare during my college years. "I made your favorite pot roast," she announced as I arrived, though pot roast had been Amber's favorite since childhood. Mine was lasagna. I never bothered correcting her anymore. We sat around the dining room table, the same one we had gathered at for family meals throughout my childhood. Dad poured wine for everyone, including Amber, who had just turned 22. The conversation flowed easily enough, with Amber discussing her plans after graduation and me sharing carefully selected details about my new job. "We actually have a big announcement," Mom said after serving dessert, an elaborate homemade cheesecake that was predictably Amber's favorite. "Your father and I have been planning something special to celebrate Amber's graduation." "That is great," I said genuinely. Despite everything, I wanted my sister to be celebrated. "What are you planning?" Mom's eyes lit up as she reached for her phone. "We have booked a family vacation to St. Lucia. 2 weeks at the Sandals Grand Resort and Spa. 5-star accommodations, all-inclusive meals and activities." She turned her phone around to show us photos of stunning oceanfront villas, infinity pools, overlooking crystal blue waters and elegant dining rooms. The resort looked like paradise. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "When do we leave?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Well, Dad began, clearing his throat awkwardly. "The trip is actually for your mother, Amber, and myself." I sat there, processing his words. "Oh," I finally managed. "I just assumed when you said family vacation." "Honey," Mom interjected, reaching across to pat my hand. "Amber is graduating college. This is her special celebration." "I graduated college last year," I pointed out, trying to keep my tone neutral. "We went to Applebee's." Another uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Amber stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. "You know we are proud of you, son," Dad said. "But this trip has been planned specifically as Amber's graduation gift. The resort activities are really geared toward what she enjoys." I looked at the photos again. The resort had multiple restaurants, a spa, water sports, hiking trails, and cultural excursions. There was literally something for everyone. "Maybe I could pay my own way," I suggested, though the thought of spending thousands of dollars just to be included in my own family stung deeply. "The villas only accommodate 3 people comfortably," Mom said quickly. "And besides, you have your new job. You probably cannot take that much time off." "I have 3 weeks of vacation time saved up," I countered. Mom sighed impatiently. "Sheldon, Amber needs this break more than you do. College has been very stressful for her." I bit back the retort that rose to my lips about my own college experience, working 20 hours a week while maintaining a higher GPA than Amber ever had. It would accomplish nothing. "How can you afford 2 weeks at a 5-star resort?" I asked. Instead, changing tactics. "When I asked for help with my security deposit last month, you said finances were tight." Another glance between my parents. "We have been saving for this," Dad explained weakly. "It is a special occasion." The irony that my graduation apparently had not qualified as a special occasion worthy of saving for was not lost on me. Neither was the fact that they had purchased a new Mercedes just 3 months earlier. "I do not understand why I am being excluded from a family vacation," I said finally, my composure starting to crack. "Is there something I have done wrong?" "Do not be so sensitive," Mom said dismissively. "You will understand when you are older." There it was. That phrase again. The universal explanation for every inequity, every slight, every clear example of favoritism. "I am 26 years old," I said quietly. "How much older do I need to be before I understand why my sister gets celebrated and I get dismissed?" "That is not fair, Sheldon," Dad said, his tone hardening. "We have supported you throughout your life." "Have you?" I asked, surprising myself with the direct challenge. This was not how I usually handled these situations. Amber finally spoke up, her voice small. "Maybe Sheldon could come for part of the trip." "No, honey," Mom replied immediately. "The booking is very specific. And besides, this is your special time." I looked at my sister, seeing the discomfort in her expression. This was not her fault. She had never asked to be the favorite. She had never demanded special treatment. "It is fine," I said, standing up from the table. "I hope you all have a wonderful time." "Do not be like that," Mom said sharply. "We can plan something else another time." The vague promise hung in the air as substantial as smoke. We all knew there would be no equivalent trip for me. There never had been. "I should get going," I said, gathering my jacket. "I have an early start tomorrow." I hugged. Amber whispered congratulations in her ear and offered perfunctory goodbyes to my parents. As I drove back to my apartment that night, something fundamental shifted inside me. The hurt and confusion of years crystallized into a clarity I had never experienced before. This was not going to change. This was not something I would magically understand when I got older. This was simply who my parents were and how they viewed me versus my sister. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what it would mean to stop accepting it. In the weeks following the vacation announcement, I felt myself emotionally withdrawing from my parents more than ever before. Our already infrequent calls became shorter with me, offering one-word responses to their questions. I stopped sharing details about my life entirely. My parents barely seemed to notice the change. They were completely consumed with planning for the Street Lucia trip, which was scheduled for July, just after Amber's graduation ceremony. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by the house to return a toolkit I had borrowed from Dad. I let myself in, using my key, calling out a greeting as I entered. No one answered, but I could hear voices from the kitchen. As I approached, I realized my parents were discussing the vacation. "I booked the Sunset Catamaran cruise for your second night there," Dad was saying. "And I added the shopping excursion to Castries for later in the week. I put an extra $1,000 on the resort credit card for Amber to use for souvenirs and spa treatments. She is going to be so surprised." Mom replied excitedly. "Do you think we should also book the helicopter tour? It is expensive, but would be such a special memory for her." I stood frozen in the hallway, toolkit in hand. The extra excursions they were casually adding would cost thousands of dollars on top of the already lavish vacation. Meanwhile, when I had asked for $700 to help with a car repair the previous month, they had lectured me about financial responsibility and the importance of saving for emergencies. "Hey," I said, finally entering the kitchen. Both my parents jumped slightly, looking guilty. "Sheldon." "We did not hear you come in," Mom said quickly, closing the resort brochure on the counter. "Just returning Dad's tools," I said, placing the kit on the counter. "Sounds like the trip planning is coming along well." "Just finalizing a few details," Dad said vaguely. I nodded suddenly, unable to maintain the pretense of being okay with any of this. "I need to get going." "Do you want to stay for lunch?" Mom offered. I was about to make sandwiches. "No thanks," I replied, already heading for the door. That afternoon marked the beginning of my reassessment of our entire family dynamic. Memories from throughout my childhood and adolescence replayed in my mind, now viewed through a different lens. The Christmas, when Amber received an expensive new computer while I got clothes. The way my parents attended every one of her performances, but often had conflicts during my academic competitions. The summer they sent her to an arts camp in Europe, while I worked at a local grocery store. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a consistent pattern that I had normalized and excused for years. 2 weeks later, I discovered something that shattered any remaining illusions. I had stopped by my parents' house to help Amber move some boxes to her new apartment. While looking for packing tape in Dad's office, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I gathered them up, a bank statement caught my eye. The statement showed a transfer of $25,000 to Sally Mae, the company that managed Amber's student loans. The transfer had been made just 3 months earlier. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking slightly. When I had graduated, I had asked my parents if they could help with even a portion of my remaining student loans. I had approximately the same amount of debt as Amber, despite my scholarship due to housing and living expenses. "We just do not have the means to help with that," Mom had told me firmly. "Student loans are part of becoming a responsible adult. You will figure it out." Yet here was proof that they had paid off Amber's loans entirely without ever mentioning it to me. When Amber went to grab lunch for us, I confronted my parents in the kitchen. "I saw the bank statement," I said, without preamble. "You paid off Amber's student loans." Mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We were going to tell you about that," when I asked. "After telling me for years that helping with student loans was not possible for you financially, after watching me take extra jobs to make my loan payments while giving Amber a completely free start. Your sister is not as strong as you are," Dad said, his tone defensive. "She would struggle with loan payments." "And I do not?" I asked incredulously. "I have been working since I was 16 years old. I worked through college. I have never once had the luxury of not worrying about money." "You have always been more capable," Mom said, as if this were a compliment rather than an explanation for why they had consistently given me less support. "So I get punished for being responsible?" I asked. "Amber gets rewarded for needing more help." "It is not like that," Dad protested weakly. "Then what is it like?" I demanded. "Explain it to me. Make me understand." They exchanged another of their looks, the silent communication that always excluded me. "You will understand when you are older," Mom finally said, falling back on her standard explanation. Something snapped inside me at that moment. I was not going to get older and magically understand why my parents consistently chose to give Amber more love, more support, and more resources. I was not going to wake up one day and be okay with being the less valued child. Later that evening, Amber and I were alone in her room packing boxes. "I wish they would include you on the trip," she said suddenly. "I even told Mom I would rather have you there than go on some of the fancy excursions they planned." "What did she say?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Amber sighed. "That this was my special celebration, and to stop feeling guilty about things I deserve." I nodded, continuing to pack books into a box. "I did not ask them to pay off my loans." Amber added quietly, "I did not even know until after they did it." I know I assured her, "This is not about you, Amber. It never has been." And it was true. My sister had never asked for the preferential treatment. She had never tried to exclude me or diminish me. She was simply accepting what our parents offered, as any young person would. The problem was not Amber. The problem was that I had spent 26 years trying to earn equal love and consideration from parents who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. The problem was that this pattern would continue indefinitely unless something changed. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I realized that I would have to be the one to make that change. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking deeply about what family should mean. In my view, family meant equal love, equal support, equal celebration of achievements. It meant acknowledging each person's unique needs while still maintaining fundamental fairness. My reality was entirely different. My reality was a constant reminder that I was valued less, deserved less, and should expect less than my sister. My reality was being told I would understand when I was older rather than being given honest explanations for hurtful decisions. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist, something I had considered for years, but had avoided out of a vague sense of loyalty to my family. Dr. Elizabeth Wilson listened carefully as I outlined the pattern of favoritism and my recent discoveries. "What you are describing sounds like a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic," she explained after I finished. "It is unfortunately common in some families and extremely damaging to both children, though in different ways." "Both children?" I asked, surprised. "But Amber gets everything." "Amber is trapped in a role as well," Dr. Wilson explained. "The golden child often struggles with authentic identity development and fears disappointing others. They often have difficulty making independent decisions because their worth has been tied to pleasing the parents." I thought about how Amber called me for advice rather than our parents, how uncomfortable she seemed with their excessive attention and gifts. "The more important question is," Dr. Wilson continued, "what do you want to do about your situation now?" That question resonated with me deeply. What did I want to do? For the first time, I allowed myself to consider options beyond continuing to tolerate the status quo. "I think I need distance," I said slowly. "A lot of distance." Over the next several sessions, Dr. Wilson helped me recognize that while I could not change my parents, I could change my response to them. I could set boundaries. I could create a life that was not defined by their inability to value me equally. With this new perspective, I began researching job opportunities in other cities. My current position in Denver was fine, but I realized staying in the same city as my family meant continued enmeshment in their dynamics. I updated my resume, reached out to contacts, and started applying for positions. Within 2 weeks, I received an offer from a tech company in Seattle that exceeded my current salary by 20%. The position would start in August, just after my family would return from their Street Lucia vacation. It seemed like the universe was aligning to offer me a fresh start. I accepted the position immediately and began making arrangements. I researched apartments online and found a 1-bedroom unit in a modern building in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood. I paid the security deposit from my savings and signed a lease beginning August 1st. As my plans took shape, I wrestled with how to tell my family. The thought of a dramatic confrontation exhausted me. The thought of another dismissive "you will understand when you are older" made my blood boil. I considered simply announcing my move matter-of-factly, but I knew my parents would find ways to minimize it or make it about Amber somehow. "How can you move so far from your sister?" they would ask, without considering that they were taking her thousands of miles away on a vacation that excluded me. I wrote several versions of an explanation letter trying to articulate years of hurt and disappointment. Each draft felt simultaneously inadequate and excessive. How could I compress a lifetime of being the less favored child into a single document? In the end, I decided on something much simpler. I would leave my house key with a brief note and be gone before they returned from Street Lucia. No drama, no arguments, no opportunity for them to dismiss my feelings yet again. The decision brought an immediate sense of relief. I began sorting through my belongings, deciding what to take to Seattle and what to leave behind. I donated clothes I no longer wore and sold furniture I would not need. I arranged for a moving company to pick up my essential items the day after my family departed for their vacation. Throughout these preparations, I maintained a normal facade during my limited interactions with my family. I attended Amber's graduation ceremony, smiling in photos and offering genuine congratulations. I helped my parents load new luggage they had purchased specially for the trip. I listened to their excited discussions of excursions and resort amenities without revealing my plans. The night before their departure, Mom invited me over for a farewell dinner. I sat at the dining room table one last time watching my family's excitement build. "We will bring you back a souvenir," Mom promised, as I prepared to leave. "Maybe one of those little bottles of hot sauce they make there." I nodded, knowing I would be gone before they returned with their trinkets and tales of paradise. "That would be nice," I said, hugging each of them goodbye. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. I was closing one chapter of my life and opening another. The decision was painful, but necessary for my own well-being. For the first time in 26 years, I was choosing myself. The morning of my family's departure dawned bright and clear. I arrived at their house early to help load luggage into the taxi that would take them to the airport. Mom was fluttering around with last-minute details while Dad checked their documents for the third time. Amber sat quietly on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Do you have your passports?" I asked, going through the standard travel checklist. "All here," Dad confirmed, patting his travel pouch. "Sunscreen, medications, chargers," I continued. "Yes, to everything," Mom said with an impatient wave. "We have been planning this for months, Sheldon." I nodded, lifting the heaviest suitcase and carrying it outside to where the taxi driver was opening the trunk. Inside, I heard Mom reminding Amber to bring her new sun hat, and Dad double-checking that they had the resort confirmation printed out. As the taxi filled with luggage, the reality of what I was about to do hit me fully. This would likely be the last time I saw this house as my family home, the last time I participated in these familiar routines of family life. "The taxi is ready," I announced, returning inside. Mom was applying a final touch of lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a refrigerator magnet shaped like a palm tree and handed it to me. "I got this for you early. A little piece of Street Lucia, since you cannot be there." The magnet was cheap and tacky, likely purchased at a local tourist shop rather than actually from Street Lucia. It perfectly symbolized the token efforts my parents made to include me while substantively excluding me from their lives. "Thanks," I said, pocketing the magnet. "Have a wonderful time. We will bring you a proper souvenir when we return," Mom promised, as if that were the issue. "Maybe something from one of the craft markets." I nodded and followed them outside. Dad locked the house while Mom and Amber climbed into the taxi. I stood on the driveway waving as they settled in. "See you in 2 weeks," Dad called as he joined them. "Thanks for helping with the luggage." "No problem," I replied, raising my hand in a final wave. "Have a safe flight." The taxi pulled away and I watched it disappear around the corner. They had no idea this was goodbye. They had no idea I would not be here when they returned with their tans and their stories and their shared experiences from which I had been excluded. I walked slowly back to my car, feeling strangely hollow. For a moment, I questioned my decision. Was I overreacting? Was I being petty and jealous? No. 26 years of consistent behavior had shown me exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy of importance. I was not imagining it, not exaggerating it, not misinterpreting it. I was finally seeing it clearly and responding appropriately. I drove back to my apartment and continued the packing I had started weeks earlier. The moving company would arrive the following morning to collect my boxes and furniture. My plane ticket to Seattle was booked for the day after that. Everything was arranged. In the afternoon, I returned to my parents' empty house. I had decided to gather a few childhood mementos I had left behind over the years. As I walked through the quiet rooms, memories surfaced unbidden. Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, family game nights. Not all of my childhood had been marked by inequality. There had been moments of genuine connection and joy. In my old bedroom, which had long since been converted to a home office, I found a box of my belongings in the closet. Old school awards, sports trophies, a few favorite books I had never taken with me. I selected a few items with sentimental value and left the rest. In the hallway, I paused to look at the family photos that lined the wall. In almost every one, Amber was centered between our parents while I stood slightly apart. Had the photographers positioned us that way, or had we naturally assumed those roles, I could not remember. I continued downstairs where my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Amber's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "We just got to the airport," she said. Mom realized she forgot to leave the neighbor's key under the mat for them to water her plants. "Could you put it out?" "Sure," I agreed. "No problem." "Thanks," Amber said, then hesitated. "Listen, I know this trip is weird without you. I did try to get them to include you." "I know you did," I assured her. "It is not your fault, Amber. Enjoy your vacation. You deserve to celebrate your graduation. When we get back, maybe you and I could take a weekend trip somewhere," she suggested. "Just the two of us." "Maybe," I said non-committally, knowing I would be thousands of miles away when she returned. The thought of her hurt and confusion when she discovered my absence caused a pang of guilt. "I should let you go. You probably need to get through security." "Yeah," she agreed. "Love you, bro." "Love you too," I replied honestly. I did love my sister despite everything. She was as much a product of our parents' dysfunctional dynamics as I was. After hanging up, I found the neighbor's key in the kitchen drawer, where Mom always kept it. I placed it under the mat on the front porch as requested. One final act of family duty. Back in the kitchen, I stood looking around at the space where I had grown up. The table where we had eaten countless meals. The refrigerator still covered with Amber's accomplishments. But none of mine. The counter where I had done homework while Mom prepared dinner. I removed my house key from my keychain and placed it in the center of the kitchen table. Beside it, I left a simple note that read I needed to understand who I am, without waiting to be older. No explanations, no accusations, no lengthy outpouring of years of hurt feelings. Just a simple statement that I knew they would understand, even if they pretended not to. I took one final walk through the house, touching door frames and countertops, saying goodbye to the physical space that had contained my childhood. Then I walked out the front door without looking back. As I drove away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the family relationship I had always wanted, but never truly had. Relief at finally breaking free from patterns that had damaged my self-worth for decades. Fear about starting completely fresh in a new city. But underneath all those feelings was something new and unfamiliar. Freedom. I was free to create a life based on my own choices, rather than in reaction to my parents' favoritism. I was free to define success on my own terms, rather than constantly seeking approval I would never fully receive. For the first time in my life, I was truly choosing my own path. The first weeks in Seattle were both exhilarating and terrifying. I arrived on a surprisingly sunny day in early August, the city showing off its most beautiful self, with views of Mount Rainier visible in the distance and the waters of Puget Sound sparkling below. My apartment in Ballard was small but modern, with large windows and a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. The moving company delivered my belongings the day after I arrived, and I spent my first weekend arranging furniture and making the space feel like home. My new job at the technology firm started the following Monday. The company culture was energetic and innovative, a stark contrast to my previous position. My team members were welcoming, inviting me to lunch, and offering tips about the best local coffee shops and restaurants. For the first time, I was being evaluated solely on my own merits, without the shadow of family comparisons hanging over me. 1 week into my new life, I realized that my family would now be halfway through their vacation in St. Lucia. I imagined them lounging by infinity pools, taking sunset cruises and shopping in local markets. I tried not to think about their inevitable return home the moment when they would find my key and note on the kitchen table. I had deliberately left my old phone behind when I moved, purchasing a new one with a new number in Seattle. I had transferred my important contacts, but had not yet shared my new number with any family members. I was not ready for that conversation. When I calculated that they would be arriving home from their trip, I felt a momentary surge of anxiety. Would they be worried, angry? Would they understand why I had left? Part of me wanted to call to explain, to ease the transition, but a stronger part knew that any conversation would simply lead to more dismissals. More you will understand when you are older. More excuses for behavior that had no valid justification. 2 days after their scheduled return, I checked my email and found what I had been both expecting and dreading. Multiple messages from my parents and Amber, with subject lines ranging from, "Where are you?" to "Please contact us immediately," to "We are worried sick." I opened Amber's email first. "Sheldon, what is happening? We got home and found your key. Your phone goes straight to voicemail. No one knows where you are. Mom is freaking out, and Dad has called the police, though they say adults are allowed to leave. Please just let me know you are okay." My mother's emails were less concerned and more accusatory. "How could you disappear without a word? After everything we have done for you, this kind of dramatic behavior is exactly why we worry about your emotional stability." My father's tone was confused and hurt. "Son, we do not understand what is happening. If you needed space or were upset about something, you could have talked to us. Disappearing like this has your mother beside herself with worry." I closed the emails without responding. They had my note. They knew exactly why I had left, even if they would never admit it to themselves. The fact that my mother's response was to accuse me of being emotionally unstable rather than to reflect on her own behavior confirmed I had made the right decision. Over the next few days, the emails continued, along with voicemails left on my old phone, which I checked remotely. My mother's messages grew increasingly angry, my father's increasingly bewildered, and Amber's increasingly hurt. "I thought we were close." Her latest email read, "I do not understand why you would cut me off too." That one nearly broke my resolve. Amber had not created the family dynamic that drove me away. She was in many ways as much a victim of it as I was trapped in the role of the golden child, just as I had been trapped as the scapegoat. I drafted a brief email to her alone, explaining that I had moved to Seattle for a fresh start and a new job. I assured her that my decision was not about her, but about creating healthy distance from a family dynamic that had become toxic for me. I did not share my new phone number or address, but promised to be in touch when I felt ready. As weeks passed, I established new routines in Seattle. I discovered a coffee shop near my apartment, where I spent weekend mornings reading. I joined a hiking group that explored the numerous trails in the surrounding mountains. I made friends with several coworkers who invited me to trivia nights and weekend barbecues. For the first time, I was building relationships based on mutual interest and respect rather than obligation. People seemed to genuinely enjoy my company, value my opinions, and appreciate my contributions. There was no underlying current of comparison, no subtle message that I was somehow less worthy of attention or celebration. I began to discover interests I had never explored. I took a pottery class at a local community center. I learned to paddleboard on Lake Union. I attended lectures at the public library on topics ranging from architecture to marine biology. Without the constant pressure to prove my worth to my parents, I found myself free to explore and experiment simply for the joy of learning. 3 months into my new life, I received a text message from an unknown number. "It is Amber. I got your email address from your old workplace. I am coming to Seattle next weekend for a job interview. Could we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, conflicted. I missed my sister. Our relationship had always been the one healthy part of my family dynamic, but I also feared that meeting her would somehow pull me back into the toxic patterns I had worked so hard to escape. After consulting with Dr. Wilson, who had continued to work with me via video sessions, I decided to respond. "I would like that." I texted back. "Let me know when and where." The following weekend, I met Amber at a quiet restaurant near Pike Place Market. She looked different somehow, more mature and composed than I remembered. "You disappeared," she said simply, after we ordered drinks. "I needed to," I replied. "I left a note." "Your cryptic note did not explain much," she pointed out. "Mom and Dad are still completely confused about why you left." I doubted that was true. My parents might claim confusion, but they knew exactly what had happened. They simply refused to acknowledge it. "How are they?" I asked, changing the subject. Amber sighed. "Mom oscillates between fury and dramatic worry. Dad seems genuinely sad. They hired a private investigator, you know. That is how they found out you moved to Seattle." "I am an adult who chose to relocate for a job," I said. "I did not need to ask permission or provide a forwarding address." "I know," Amber acknowledged. "But disappearing like that was extreme, Sheldon. You could have told me at least." I looked at my sister, seeing both the child she had been and the woman she was becoming. "Would you have kept it from them if I had told you I was leaving?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Probably not. I would have tried to convince you to talk to them first. And that conversation would have gone exactly the way every conversation has gone for 26 years, I explained. They would have dismissed my feelings. Mom would have told me I would understand when I was older and nothing would have changed." Amber was quiet for a moment. "The trip was miserable, you know," she finally said. "After we found your note, I spent the whole time worrying about you and fighting with Mom and Dad about how they treated you." "That was not my intention," I said honestly. "I did not want to ruin your celebration." "I know," she replied. "And part of me understands why you left the way you did. I just wish it could have been different." We talked for hours that afternoon, more honestly than we ever had before. Amber admitted she had always been uncomfortable with the preferential treatment. I acknowledged that my resentment had sometimes affected our relationship unfairly. We began the process of rebuilding our connection as adults separate from our parents' influence. "They want your address," Amber said, as we prepared to leave. "They want to come see you." I shook my head. "I am not ready for that." "Will you ever be?" she asked. "Maybe," I replied. "But only with clear boundaries and expectations. Only if there is acknowledgement of the patterns that drove me away." Amber nodded. "I understand. Can I visit again?" "Anytime," I told her, and meant it. As I walked her back to her hotel, I felt a weight lifting. I could maintain a relationship with my sister without being pulled back into dysfunctional family patterns. I could set boundaries while still allowing love to exist within those boundaries. It was the beginning of a new kind of family connection, one built on mutual respect rather than established roles and expectations. 6 months after my move to Seattle, I had created a life that felt authentically mine. My apartment had become a true home, decorated with new art, discovered at local galleries and mementos from weekend explorations of the Pacific Northwest. I had been promoted at work, taking on leadership of a small development team. I had made genuine friends who knew me as I was now not, as the person I had been in my family's shadow. My communication with my family had slowly evolved into something I could manage on my own terms. Amber and I spoke regularly, our relationship strengthening now that it existed independently from our parents. I exchanged occasional emails with my father, brief and factual updates about work and life that carefully avoided deeper topics. My mother remained more problematic. Her emails alternated between guilt trips and demands that I stop punishing the family with my absence. I responded selectively, maintaining firm boundaries while trying to avoid outright hostility. In February, 7 months after my departure, my parents made their first attempt to visit Seattle. They emailed announcing they had booked flights and a hotel, presenting it as a fait accompli rather than a request. "We need to see that you are really okay," my father wrote. "Your mother will not rest until she sees you in person." After consulting with Dr. Wilson, I responded with clear conditions. "You are welcome to visit, but there are things we need to discuss if we are going to rebuild any kind of relationship. I would like us to attend a family therapy session together during your visit. This is non-negotiable." They agreed, though my mother added that she did not see why therapy was necessary when all families have their issues. I arranged a session with a colleague of Dr. Wilson who specialized in family dynamics. The day of their arrival, I met them at a neutral location, a restaurant near their downtown hotel. The moment was surreal, seeing them in the context of my new life. They looked somehow smaller, less intimidating than they had in my memories. "You look well," Dad said after an awkward greeting. "Seattle agrees with you," Mom added, her tone suggesting surprise that I could thrive without their presence. "I am doing well," I confirmed. "My job is challenging and rewarding. I have made good friends here." The conversation remained surface level through dinner, all of us carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. The next day would bring our therapy session and the real reason for their visit. When we gathered in Dr. Karen Marshall's office the following morning, the tension was palpable. My mother sat rigidly, arms crossed, while my father looked uncomfortable but resigned. Dr. Marshall began by establishing ground rules for communication, then asked each of us to express our perspective on what had led to my departure and the current state of our family relationships. I spoke first, calmly outlining the pattern of favoritism I had experienced throughout my life. I provided specific examples from childhood celebrations to the Street Lucia trip that had been my breaking point. I left because I realized this dynamic would never change unless I changed my participation in it, I concluded. I needed to discover who I could be outside of always being less favored, less celebrated, less supported. My father looked genuinely stunned by the catalog of incidents I described. My mother's expression remained defensive. "We always loved both our children equally," she insisted when it was her turn to speak. Amber simply needed more support and encouragement. "Sheldon was always so independent and capable." "Did you ever consider that I developed that independence because I had to?" I asked. "That I became self-sufficient because I learned early that my needs were secondary." Dr. Marshall guided the conversation, skillfully preventing it from descending into accusations and defensiveness. She helped my father articulate his growing realization that there had indeed been a pattern of unequal treatment. "I never saw it so clearly before," he admitted. "We did treat you differently, Sheldon. I think we told ourselves it was because you were stronger, more capable. But that was not fair to you." My mother remained more resistant to this acknowledgement, though even she eventually conceded that some of my examples could not be explained away. "I suppose the trip to Street Lucia could have included you," she said reluctantly, "though I still do not think it warranted disappearing without a word." It was not a full apology or acceptance of responsibility, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever received before. We agreed to continue with family therapy sessions via video conference after their return to Denver. I also agreed to more regular communication, including monthly phone calls, as long as my boundaries were respected. I am not coming back to Denver, I made clear. My life is here now, and our relationship can only continue if there is ongoing effort to address the patterns that damaged it in the first place. The visit concluded with a tentative truce rather than a complete resolution. Real healing would take time and consistent effort from all of us. But for the first time, there was acknowledgement of the problem, which was the essential first step toward change. After several therapy sessions, my mother finally offered what seemed like a genuine apology. "I never intended to make you feel less valued," she said. "I think I convinced myself that showing Amber more attention somehow balanced things because you were naturally more successful. I see now how wrong that was, how it must have hurt you to always be told you would understand when you were older, instead of having your feelings acknowledged." That acknowledgement, after so many years of dismissal, brought tears to my eyes. It did not erase the past, but it opened the possibility of a different future. Amber visited Seattle regularly, our sibling relationship growing stronger as we both established our adult identities. She eventually shared that leaving home had been the best thing I could have done for both of us. It forced them to see the dynamic, she explained, during one visit. And it helped me set my own boundaries too. I am not just the favorite child anymore. I get to be myself. A year after my departure, I reflected on the journey with Dr. Wilson. Walking away was the hardest and best decision I ever made, I told her. It preserved the possibility of a healthier relationship in the future by breaking the toxic patterns of the past. "And what about their explanation that you would understand when you were older?" she asked. "Do you understand now?" I considered the question carefully. I understand that parents are flawed humans who sometimes create damaging family dynamics without even realizing it. I understand that breaking those patterns often requires dramatic action. But most importantly, I understand that waiting to be older would never have brought the clarity they promised. That clarity came not from age, but from distance and perspective. Today, my relationship with my family continues to evolve. There are still difficult moments, still old patterns that occasionally resurface, but there is also a new framework of honesty and boundaries that makes continued connection possible. I have created a life that is truly my own, filled with meaningful work, genuine friendships, and opportunities for growth and exploration. I have learned that family can be both the people connected to us by blood and those we choose to include in our inner circle. Most importantly, I have learned that sometimes understanding yourself requires making difficult choices that others may never fully comprehend. If my story resonates with, you know that you are not alone in experiencing family dynamics that diminish your sense of worth. Your feelings are valid. Your need for equal respect and celebration is legitimate. And sometimes, creating distance is the most loving choice you can make, both for yourself and for the possibility of healthier relationships in the future. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice about family relationships for your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your own path. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we are born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage on your own.